Fan cam captured a shocking moment. Jungkook wiped Jimin's tears with trembling hands. Their gazes made Army unable to breathe. A fan cam reveals Jungkook wiping Jimin's tears with trembling hands, exposing hidden wounds, forbidden truths, and a bond that leaves Army breathless. The roar of the crowd fractured into stunned silence the moment Jungkook's trembling fingers brushed away a tear sliding down Jimin's cheek, a gesture so raw and unguarded that even the stadium lights seemed to falter. The fan cam caught everything: the uneven rise of Jimin's shoulders, the way his lips parted as if to speak but failed, the microscopic tremor in Jungkook's jaw as he forced himself to remain steady under tens of thousands of watching eyes. The stage lights painted them in gold and violet, but the moment felt stripped of performance, stripped of choreography, stripped of the myth they had built around themselves. This was not an idol comforting a bandmate. This was a human being trying to hold together someone he feared. He was losing. The music had stopped mid-note. Somewhere backstage, a manager's frantic voice crackled through an earpiece, but neither of them moved. Jimin's tears were silent, almost polite, as if he were apologizing for them. He had always been careful, careful with his words, careful with his smiles, careful not to let the fractures show. Tonight, the fractures had split wide open. Jungkook swallowed hard. The scent of stage smoke and overheated cables burned the back of his throat. He had rehearsed 1,000 endings to 1,000 disasters, missed cues, technical failures, injuries, but never this. Never the quiet collapse of the person who had taught him how to stand in the first place. "Look at me," Jungkook whispered, so softly the microphone did not catch it, but the fan cam did. The world would later slow the footage, enhance the audio, argue over lip movements. None of them would understand that the words were not a command but a plea. Jimin tried, his eyes lifted, glassy and unfocused, until they found Jungkook. In that fragile intersection of gaze, years unfolded, trainee dorm nights thick with exhaustion and instant noodles, whispered confessions before debut, the unspoken promise to endure whatever the world demanded of them. Their bond had always lived in the spaces between words, in shared glances and half-finished sentences. Tonight, it was laid bare for everyone. The crowd began to murmur, a wave of confusion rippling outward. Phones rose higher. The giant screen behind them, delayed by 2 seconds, displayed the same devastating intimacy in magnified detail. Somewhere in the sea of light sticks, a fan sobbed aloud. The sound carried. Jimin's fingers curled into the fabric of Jungkook's sleeve, a rare, instinctive grasp. He hated needing anyone. He hated the weakness he believed tears represented. But the secret he had been carrying, weeks of suffocating pressure, a fear that his voice was failing, that he was becoming a liability, that the smiles he offered the world were slowly hollowing him out, had reached a breaking point under the relentless weight of expectation. "I'm sorry," Jimin mouthed. Jungkook shook his head immediately, a sharp, almost angry movement. Sorry was a word they had both used too often, a word that had built invisible walls between them. He placed his hand over Jimin's, where it clutched his sleeve, grounding him. His own hand was shaking. He could feel it, traitorous and exposed, but he did not pull away. The arena lights dimmed unexpectedly, plunging the stage into a softer twilight as technicians scrambled to adjust. In the hush, the absence of music became a presence of its own. Every breath, every shift of fabric, every faint hitch in Jimin's chest seemed amplified. Jungkook leaned closer. "You don't have to be perfect," he murmured, voice rough, meant only for Jimin, but carried away in fragments by nearby microphones. "You just have to stay." The words struck something deep and unguarded. Jimin's composure fractured completely, his forehead dropped briefly against Jungkook's shoulder, a fleeting contact that lasted less than a heartbeat, yet held the weight of years. The crowd gasped in collective disbelief, not out of scandal, but out of witnessing something achingly real in a world of polished illusions. Security signals flashed at the edge of the stage, managers debating whether to cut the broadcast, to dim the screens, to restore the illusion. But it was too late. The fan cams had already captured the truth from 100 angles. The moment belonged to the world now. Jimin drew back first. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, as though relearning how to breathe. His eyes were still wet, but the panic had receded, replaced by a fragile resolve. He wiped the last trace of tears with the back of his hand, then, almost shyly, let out a small, self-conscious laugh that trembled at the edges. The sound broke the tension. A ripple of relieved laughter and cheers followed, tentative at first, then swelling into a wave of support that washed over the stage. The crowd was no longer silent, it was holding them up. Jungkook exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He stepped back half a pace, not in retreat, but in respect, giving Jimin space to stand on his own. Yet his hand lingered for a moment longer, brushing Jimin's wrist in a silent promise, "I'm still here." When the music finally resumed, it did so gently, as if the band itself understood that something sacred had occurred. Jimin's voice, when he sang again, carried a new texture, raw, imperfect, and achingly human. Jungkook harmonized beside him, their voices weaving together not in flawless precision, but in shared resilience. Long after the concert ended, long after the lights dimmed and the stage emptied, the fan cam footage would continue to circulate, paused, zoomed, analyzed. People would debate what it meant, invent narratives, project fantasies. But the truth of that moment lived only in the quiet space they had carved out for each other amid the noise. They had not shattered. They had not fallen apart under the gaze of the world. Instead, in the most public of places, they had allowed themselves to be vulnerable, and in doing so, discovered that their bond was not weakened by the truth of their pain, but strengthened by the courage to share it. And somewhere, in countless rooms lit by phone screens replaying that single, trembling gesture, hearts steadied in the knowledge that even those who seemed untouchable were still human, still fragile, and still capable of holding one another together when the weight became too much to bear. The hallway lights flickered like a warning as Jimin slammed the dressing room door behind him, his breath ragged, his hands still shaking from the moment he could not take back. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, voice low but sharp, refusing to turn around. Jungkook stood in the doorway, chest rising and falling, the echo of the crowd still vibrating in his bones. "Done what? Help you?" "Help me?" Jimin let out a brittle laugh. "You call exposing me to the entire world help?" The room smelled faintly of hairspray and stage sweat, the mirrors still framed by harsh bulbs that made every flaw impossible to hide. Jungkook stepped inside and closed the door softly, as if gentleness could undo what had already happened. "You were breaking," Jungkook said. "What was I supposed to do? Pretend I didn't see?" Jimin finally turned. His eyes were rimmed red, not from tears alone, but from weeks, months, of sleepless nights and silent panic. "Yes," he shot back. "That's exactly what you were supposed to do. We pretend. That's the job. That's what we agreed to when we chose this life." The words landed like blows. Jungkook flinched, not visibly, but in the tightness of his jaw. He had always been the one who endured quietly, who absorbed the pressure like a wall meant to hold. But tonight, something inside him refused to stay silent. "I didn't agree to watch you destroy yourself," he said, voice rising despite his effort to control it. "You think I don't notice? The missed meals, the way you rehearse until your voice gives out, the way you smile at everyone except when you're alone." Jimin's lips parted, anger faltering for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "You don't get to decide what I can handle. And you don't get to push everyone away and call it strength," Jungkook fired back. The air between them crackled, thick with years of unspoken arguments finally clawing their way to the surface. Outside, muffled footsteps and distant laughter reminded them that the world had not stopped, but inside that room, time felt suspended, fragile. Jimin ran a hand through his damp hair, packing once, twice, like a caged thought searching for an exit. "Do you know what they're saying out there right now?" he demanded. "They're analyzing every frame, every glance. They'll turn it into something it was. They'll twist it until it doesn't belong to us anymore." Jungkook's voice dropped. "It already belongs to them. That's the price of the stage." A long silence followed, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Jimin's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had ignited. "I'm tired," he admitted, the words barely audible. "Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that sits in your chest and tells you you're one mistake away from becoming a disappointment. Jungkook's anger dissolved, replaced by something heavier. He stepped closer, but stopped short of touching him, as if unsure whether comfort would be welcomed or rejected. "You were never a disappointment," he said quietly. "Not to them, not to me." Jimin's gaze flickered upward. "You don't know that." "I do," Jungkook insisted, "because I've built my strength on you. Every time I thought I couldn't keep up, you were there. Every time I doubted myself, you were the one who stayed up with me until sunrise, making stupid jokes and burning ramen." A ghost of a smile tugged at Jimin's mouth before vanishing. "You always overcooked it. You always ate it anyway." The fragile warmth lasted only a heartbeat before the weight of reality pressed back in. Jimin leaned against the makeup table, staring at his reflection as if searching for the version of himself he used to recognize. "What if I can't do this anymore?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. The words hit Jungkook like a physical force. "Don't say that." "I'm serious," Jimin continued, voice trembling. "What if one day I step on that stage and there's nothing left inside me to give? What if the only thing they see is someone who used to be enough?" Jungkook closed the distance between them, his restraint finally breaking. He gripped Jimin's shoulders, not hard, but firmly enough to anchor him. "Then we face that day together. You don't get to disappear on me, on us." Jimin's breath hitched. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," Jungkook said. "It's terrifying, but so is pretending you're invincible." For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension shifted, no longer sharp but raw, exposed. Jimin searched Jungkook's face, as if trying to determine whether the certainty there was real or just another performance. "You were shaking," Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook blinked. "What?" "On stage, your hands. You think I didn't notice?" Jimin's voice softened. "You were scared too." Jungkook exhaled slowly. "Of course I was. I thought you were slipping away right in front of me, and I couldn't stop it." The confession hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Jimin's defenses, worn thin by exhaustion, began to crumble. "I didn't mean to scare you," he whispered. "I know," Jungkook replied, "but you did, and I'd rather face that fear than lose you to silence." A knock rattled the door, abrupt and urgent. "5 minutes to press," a manager's voice called. "We need statements. The clip is already everywhere." The words shattered the fragile cocoon they had built. Reality surged back in screens, headlines, speculation, narratives they would never control. Jimin closed his eyes. "Statements," he repeated hollow. "Right, we turn it into something safe, something polished." Jungkook hesitated. "We could tell the truth." Jimin opened his eyes again, startled. "The truth?" A bitter smile curved his lips. "Since when has the truth ever been enough for them?" "Maybe it's not for them," Jungkook said. "Maybe it's for us." Another silence, deeper this time. Jimin studied him as if seeing him anew, not the youngest member he had once guided, but someone who had grown into his own gravity, his own defiance. "You've changed," Jimin murmured. "So have you," Jungkook replied. "You've just been too busy surviving to notice." The hallway outside buzzed with movement, the world demanding their return. Jimin straightened, wiping the last traces of vulnerability from his face, not erasing them, but folding them carefully away. "We go out there together," he said. Jungkook nodded. "Always." As they stepped into the corridor, the noise surged, voices, cameras, questions waiting like loaded traps. Yet something had shifted between them, something unspoken but unbreakable. The moment on stage had not destroyed them. It had forced them to confront the fractures they had long ignored. And as the first flashbulb exploded in white light, Jimin did not flinch. Jungkook did not look away. Side by side, they walked forward, not as flawless idols, but as two people who had chosen, despite fear and scrutiny and the relentless weight of expectation, to remain. The first question hit before they even reached their seats. Were the tears real, or was it staged for sympathy? The words sliced through the press room, sharp and unapologetic, and for a split second, The air seemed to vanish from Jimin's lungs. Flashbulbs detonated like lightning, freezing his expression mid-breath. Beside him, Jungkook went utterly still, every muscle in his body tightening as if bracing for impact. The moderator stammered, attempting to redirect, but the damage had already been done. The question hung there, poisonous and impossible to ignore. Jimin leaned toward the microphone before anyone could stop him. Do you think pain becomes less real because someone witnesses it? His voice was calm, but there was a tremor beneath it, like a fault line threatening to split. A murmur rippled through the room. The reporter didn't back down. Fans are saying the moment looked intimate. Some are speculating about the nature of your relationship. Jungkook's chair scraped softly against the floor as he shifted forward. Speculating, he repeated, his tone dangerously quiet. About what exactly? About whether what they saw was friendship, the reporter said, pressing on with clinical detachment, or something more. The room erupted, whispers, gasps, the frantic clicking of keyboards. The question was the one everyone had danced around for years, the one that lived in headlines and comment sections, the one that reduced a lifetime of shared struggle to a single, sensational possibility. Jimin's fingers curled into his palms beneath the table. He could feel his pulse in his throat, loud and relentless. He had spent years perfecting composure, turning vulnerability into performance, truth into something digestible. But tonight, the carefully constructed walls felt brittle. What if it was more? Jungkook said suddenly. The room fell into stunned silence. Jimin's head snapped toward him. Jungkook. I'm asking, Jungkook continued, eyes locked on the sea of cameras. Would that make the moment less human, less deserving of respect? The moderator looked like he might faint. A manager at the back of the room shook his head violently, mouthing, "Stop," but Jungkook didn't look away. The reporter hesitated for the first time. It would change the narrative. Jungkook let out a humorless laugh. There it is, narrative. You're not asking about truth, you're asking about a story you can sell. Jimin's heart pounded so hard it hurt. This was dangerous territory, contracts, reputations, the fragile ecosystem that sustained everything they had built. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred. A fierce, unexpected relief at hearing the unspoken dragged into the light. Enough, Jimin said quietly, placing a hand over Jungkook's on the table. The contact was brief but electric, a silent plea and a warning intertwined. We are here to talk about the music. But the room had tasted blood. Then tell us about the tears, another voice called. Were they because of burnout, conflict within the group? Is there something fans should be worried about? Jimin closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling slowly. When he opened them again, the polished idol mask was gone. What remained was something rawer, steadier. Yes, he said, you should be worried, not about us falling apart, but about the fact that you expect us never to. The words landed with a force that silenced even the most aggressive reporters. We are human, Jimin continued. We get tired, we get scared, we wonder if we're enough. Tonight I forgot how to hide that, and he, his hand tightened briefly over Jungkook's, refused to let me face it alone. The honesty in his voice was disarming, stripping the spectacle from the moment and leaving only truth. Cameras continued to flash, but the frenzy had shifted into something more reverent, uncertain. A reporter in the front row spoke more gently. Do you regret that it was seen? Jimin considered the question. Regret had been his constant companion, regret for imperfections, for missteps, for every moment he felt he had failed to meet impossible expectations. But tonight felt different. No, he said at last. I regret that we live in a world where vulnerability becomes controversy. Jungkook turned to him, something fierce and proud burning in his eyes. And I don't regret reaching for him, he added. Not then, not now, not ever. The room held its breath. Somewhere a phone buzzed. A notification lit up a screen. The clip had surpassed 10 million views. The world was watching, dissecting, choosing sides. Yet in that press room, under unforgiving lights, the truth felt strangely untouchable. The moderator cleared his throat shakily. "Next question," he said, voice thin. But the tone had shifted. Questions about the album followed, about choreography, about future tour, safe territory, managed narratives. Still, the earlier exchange lingered like smoke after fire. When the conference finally ended, Jimin rose on unsteady legs. The noise of chairs scraping and voices overlapping blurred into a dull roar. He was halfway to the exit when Jungkook caught his wrist. "You didn't have to answer like that," Jungkook murmured. Jimin looked at him, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Neither did you." A beat passed between them, heavy with everything they had risked and everything they still stood to lose. "Are you angry?" Jungkook asked. Jimin shook his head slowly. "Terrified," he admitted, "but not angry." They stepped into a quieter corridor, the hum of the building wrapping around them like a fragile shield. For the first time since the stage, since the tears, since the questions that cut too close to bone, they were alone. Jungkook leaned back against the wall, dragging a hand through his hair. "I meant what I said," he confessed, "about not regretting it, about reaching for you." Jimin's chest tightened. "You can't say things like that lightly." "I'm not," Jungkook replied. "That's the problem, I never have." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jimin searched his face for hesitation, for the safety of a joke or a retreat. There was none. "You're risking everything," Jimin whispered. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. "So are you, every time you pretend you don't need anyone." Silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Jimin felt the familiar instinct to deflect, to laugh it off, to retreat behind professionalism. But the night had already stripped too much away. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "Neither do I," Jungkook admitted. "But whatever it is, we face it together, not as headlines, not as rumors, as us." Jimin's breath hitched, the enormity of that simple promise pressing against the walls he had spent years constructing. Outside, the world churned, notifications, speculation, narratives spiraling beyond their control. Inside that narrow corridor, time seemed to slow, offering them a fragile, fleeting choice: retreat into the safety of silence or step forward into an uncertain truth. Jimin reached out, fingers brushing Jungkook's sleeve, hesitant, deliberate, real. For the first time that night, neither of them pulled away. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft metallic thud, sealing Jimin and Jungkook inside a box of mirrored walls and suffocating silence, the fluorescent lights above them buzzing like an exposed nerve. For a moment, neither of them moved. Their reflections multiplied endlessly around them, two figures caught between personas and truths, between the people the world believed them to be and the ones they barely allowed themselves to acknowledge. Jungkook's voice broke first, low and unsteady. "You're shaking." "I'm not," Jimin replied automatically, even as his fingers curled into his sleeves to hide their tremor. "You always do that," Jungkook said, not accusing, just tired. "Pretend the storm isn't there because you think if you ignore it long enough, it'll pass." Jimin let out a brittle exhale. "And you always push until the storm breaks." The elevator lurched downward. The sudden motion made Jimin's shoulder brush Jungkook's arm, a fleeting contact that neither of them acknowledged aloud, but both felt like a live wire. "You shouldn't have said that in there," Jimin murmured after a beat. "About what if it was more? Do you have any idea what that will do out there?" Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Maybe it'll make them think before they turn us into a spectacle." "They won't," Jimin said flatly. "They'll dissect it. They'll slow it down, zoom in, build theories, pit fans against each other. They'll turn something fragile into a battlefield." Jungkook's reflection stared back at him from three different angles, each one looking more exhausted than the last. "So we keep lying forever." "That's not lying," Jimin snapped. "That's survival." The word echoed in the narrow space. Survival. It sounded less like a strategy and more like a sentence. Jungkook stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Is that what you call it when you starve yourself to meet impossible standards, when you rehearse until your voice breaks, when you smile so no one asks if you're okay?" Jimin's eyes flashed. Don't weaponize my struggles to make a point. I'm not, Jungkook said. I'm telling you I see you, even when you wish I wouldn't. The elevator slowed, then jolted to a halt between floors. The lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied, but the stillness that followed was different, heavier. Jimin looked up at the display panel. Why did we stop? As if in answer, the overhead lights dimmed to a dull hum. A mechanical groan reverberated through the walls. Jungkook pressed the emergency button. Nothing happened. Perfect, Jimin muttered, dragging a hand down his face. Trapped, just what we need. A strained laugh escaped Jungkook before he could stop it. Maybe the universe is forcing us to finish this conversation. Jimin slid down the mirrored wall until he was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, the polished image of composure finally cracking in private. I don't want to fight with you, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook hesitated, then joined him on the floor, close but not touching. Then don't talk to me. Silence pooled between them, thick and uncertain. I was scared, Jimin said at last, staring at his hands. On stage, not because of the crowd, not because of the cameras, because for a second I thought, what if this is the moment they realize I'm not as strong as they think? Jungkook's chest tightened. You think strength means never breaking. I think strength means never letting anyone see the cracks, Jimin replied. That's not strength, Jungkook said gently, that's isolation. Jimin's throat worked as he swallowed. You don't understand. If I fall apart, it doesn't just affect me, it affects everyone, the group, the fans, you. It affects me more when you shut me out, Jungkook said, the confession slipping free before he could soften it. Do you know what it's like to stand next to you every day and feel you drifting further away? To wonder if one day you'll smile at me the same way you smile at strangers, polite, distant, untouchable. Jimin looked up sharply, pain flashing across his face. I would never. You already are, Jungkook said, not cruelly, just honestly. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jimin's defenses rose instinctively, anger sparking to life. You think this is easy for me? You think I enjoy feeling like I'm one misstep away from becoming irrelevant? Like the world is waiting for me to fail so they can say, see, he was never enough. Jungkook's voice broke. You were enough before any of this. Before the stage, before the lights, before the expectations. You were enough when we were sharing a single mattress in a dorm that smelled like mildew and instant noodles. A startled laugh burst from Jimin despite himself. You stole the blanket every night. You kicked me in your sleep, Jungkook shot back. The memory softened the edges of the moment, but only briefly. The weight returned, pressing down harder now that it had been named. Why did you say it? Jimin asked quietly. In there, what if it was more? Jungkook's gaze dropped to his hands. Because I'm tired of pretending that caring about you is something that needs to be explained away. Jimin's pulse thundered in his ears. People will twist that. They twist everything, Jungkook replied. If I laugh with you, they analyze it. If I stand too close, they speculate. If I look away, they say we fought. There's no version of this where we are safe from their narratives. The elevator creaked softly, metal settling around them like a held breath. So what are you saying? Jimin asked, voice trembling, that we just let them believe whatever they want. I'm saying we stop living for their interpretations, Jungkook said. We decide what's real for us. Jimin searched his face, heart racing. And what is real for you? The question lingered, fragile and dangerous. Jungkook inhaled slowly. As if bracing against a plunge, you, he said, you're real for me, not the version on billboards, not the one in interviews, you, the one who hums when he thinks no one's listening, the one who pretends he's not scared of thunderstorms, the one who takes care of everyone else and forgets he deserves the same. Jimin's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, quieter this time, less panicked, but no less honest. You make it sound like I'm breakable. You are, Jungkook said. So am I. That's not weakness. That's why we need each other. The emergency lights flickered again, casting them in a dim amber glow. In the muted reflection of the mirrored walls, they looked less like idols and more like two exhausted young men sitting on a floor, stripped of pretense. "I don't know how to do this," Jimin admitted. "How to be honest without destroying everything." Jungkook's hand moved before he could overthink it, resting lightly over Jimin's. "We start here," he said, "one truth at a time." Jimin didn't pull away. The elevator jolted suddenly, the lights flaring back to full brightness as the machinery roared to life. A distant voice crackled through a speaker, apologizing for the malfunction. The box began to descend again, carrying them back toward the noise, the questions, the relentless world waiting below. But something had shifted in the silence between floors. Jimin squeezed Jungkook's hand once, quick, almost imperceptible, before letting go as the elevator doors slid open to a corridor buzzing with staff and security. They stood, straightened their clothes, and stepped out side by side. The world rushed back in, voices calling their names, phones raised, headlines already forming, but beneath the chaos, beneath the scrutiny and speculation, a fragile truth had taken root. And this time, neither of them pretended not to feel it. The corridor outside, the elevator, erupted into motion the second Jungkook and Jimin stepped out, as if the building itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. "Phones away, please, no photos," a staff member shouted, but the plea dissolved into the hum of notifications and the faint, unmistakable sound of camera shutters disguised as message alerts. Jimin's pulse spiked. The world felt too bright, too loud, too close. Just minutes ago, he had been sitting on the elevator floor admitting fears he had buried for years. Now he was back under fluorescent lights, expected to be polished, composed, untouchable. A manager rushed toward them, tablet clutched in white-knuckled hands. "We have a situation," she said without preamble. "The clip from the press conference is trending globally. Multiple outlets are running headlines about Jungkook's statement. Some are calling it a confession." Jimin stopped walking. "A confession," he repeated, disbelief hollowing out his voice. Jungkook's expression hardened. "Of what? Caring about someone?" The manager lowered her voice. "They're framing it as confirmation of a relationship. We need to release a clarification before this spirals." The word clarification tasted like erasure. Jimin felt the familiar instinct to comply rising like muscle memory. Smile, reassure, deny anything that complicates the narrative, protect the brand, protect the group, protect the fragile equilibrium that kept everything from collapsing. But the elevator silence still clung to him, warm and defiant. "What kind of clarification?" Jungkook asked. "Something simple," the manager replied. "You were emotional after the performance. You were supporting a teammate, nothing more. We emphasize professionalism and brotherhood." Brotherhood, the safest word in the industry, broad enough to explain everything, empty enough to mean nothing. Jungkook let out a slow breath. "And if we do?" The manager stared at him as if he'd spoken in another language. "You don't have that option." Jimin closed his eyes briefly. He could feel the fault line widening again, the fragile truth they had uncovered in the elevator, colliding with the machinery of an industry built on controlled narratives. "Give us a minute," Jimin said quietly. The manager hesitated, then nodded, retreating a few steps while still watching them like a ticking clock. They slipped into a narrow side hallway, the noise fading into a distant roar. The walls here were unadorned, painted a sterile gray that reflected none of the chaos outside. "You know what they're asking us to do," Jimin said, voice low. "They're asking us to turn tonight into something harmless, something they can package." Jungkook leaned back against the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Harmless means forgettable." "Harmless means safe," Jimin countered. "For who?" Jungkook shot back. "For them, for the headlines, or for the version of us that doesn't exist?" Jimin's chest tightened. "You think I don't want to be honest? You think I enjoy pretending parts of myself don't matter? But this isn't just about us. It's about everyone who depends on us. One misstep and the backlash won't just hit us. It'll hit the group, the staff, the fans who get dragged into the crossfire. Jungkook's voice softened, but the intensity didn't fade. And what about the backlash of living a lie so long you don't recognize yourself anymore? The questions struck deeper than any accusation. Jimin turned away, staring at the blank wall. "You think I don't already feel that?" he whispered. "Every time I look in the mirror and wonder which version of me they're applauding, the real one or the one I built so they wouldn't leave." Silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Jungkook pushed off the wall. "They won't leave because you're human," he said. "They'll leave if you become someone they can't feel anymore." Jimin laughed bitterly. "You're giving them too much credit." "No," Jungkook said. "I'm giving them honesty, something they rarely get." Footsteps echoed faintly from the main corridor. Time was running out. "They'll ask us directly," Jimin said, "about what you meant, about us. If we hesitate, it becomes confirmation. If we deny it, it becomes betrayal. There is no answer that doesn't cost something." Jungkook met his gaze. "Then we choose the cost we can live with." The words hung between them, stark and unavoidable. Jimin's mind raced, contracts, expectations, the fragile ecosystem of trust they had built with millions. But beneath the fear, beneath the years of careful self-editing, another voice stirred. Quieter, truer, tired of being negotiated away. "What if I'm not brave enough?" he asked. Jungkook's expression softened, the fire in his eyes giving way to something steadier. "Then I'll be brave for both of us, like you were for me when I was too scared to sing alone for the first time, like you were every time I thought I couldn't keep up." Jimin's throat tightened. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Jungkook said. "You think I could forget the person who taught me how to stand under lights that felt too heavy?" Emotion surged, sudden and overwhelming. Jimin stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If we do this, if we refuse their script, there's no going back." Jungkook didn't hesitate. "I'm not asking to go back." The hallway seemed to shrink around them, the weight of the decision pressing in from all sides. Jimin could hear his heartbeat in his ears, loud enough to drown out the distant noise. He thought of the stage, of the tear he hadn't meant to shed, of the hand that had caught it before it fell. "Okay," he said, the word barely audible but irrevocable. "No script." A flicker of surprise crossed Jungkook's face, followed by something like relief. "Okay," he echoed. They returned to the main corridor together. The manager straightened immediately. "We need your statement now. The press is waiting." Jimin exchanged a brief glance with Jungkook. In that look lived years of shared history, unspoken promises, and the fragile truth they had finally stopped running from. Jimin stepped forward. "We'll speak for ourselves." The manager's expression tightened. "That's not advisable." "It's necessary," Jungkook said. Moments later, they stood before a smaller cluster of reporters hastily assembled for a follow-up statement. Cameras lifted, microphones extended, the air thrummed with anticipation. A reporter spoke first. "There are widespread interpretations of your earlier comments. Would you like to clarify the nature of your relationship?" The question landed exactly where they knew it would. Jimin inhaled slowly, feeling the tremor in his chest, the instinct to deflect rising like a reflex. Then he felt Jungkook's presence beside him, steady, unwavering, and something inside him aligned. "We have shared more years of our lives with each other than most people share with anyone," Jimin said. "We have seen each other at our best and our worst. We have fought, forgiven, and stood side by side through things we can't even put into words. If you're asking whether that bond is real, the answer is yes." The reporters leaned in, hungry for definitions. "Labels are yours," Jungkook added. "What matters to us is that we refuse to reduce what we have to something convenient for a headline." A stunned hush followed. No denial, no confirmation, just truth, messy, uncontained, impossible to package neatly. Flashbulbs exploded, notifications surged. Somewhere, a headline was already being written. Jimin felt fear claw at his ribs, but beneath it something else unfurled. Relief, Not complete, not uncomplicated, but real. As the questions resumed in a frenzy, as narratives ignited across the globe, Jimin did not retreat. Jungkook did not look away. They stood together in the storm they had chosen to face, not as symbols, not as rumors, but as two people refusing, at last, to let the world decide which parts of them were allowed to exist. The van door slammed shut behind them, sealing Jimin and Jungkook into a dim cocoon of tinted glass and muffled chaos, the outside world reduced to a frenzy of flashing lights and distorted shouts. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The vehicle lurched forward, tires hissing against wet pavement. Rain had begun to fall, thin, relentless lines streaking across the windows like the static of a broken signal. The city lights smeared into blurred ribbons of red and gold. Jimin stared at his reflection in the darkened glass, barely recognizing the person looking back. His pulse still thundered from the press statement, from the deliberate refusal to deny, from the way truth had felt both terrifying and impossibly freeing. Across from him, Jungkook leaned back in his seat, eyes closed, chest rising in slow, controlled breaths, as if he were trying to contain a storm inside his ribs. "You realize," Jimin said finally, voice quiet but edged, "that we just detonated a bomb we can't contain." Jungkook opened his eyes. It was already ticking. "That doesn't make it easier," Jimin shot back. "Do you know what the headlines will look like by morning? Do you know what the board will say? Sponsors, investors, they don't care about truth. They care about stability." Jungkook's gaze sharpened. "And you think stability built on silence lasts?" Jimin let out a frustrated breath, dragging his fingers through his damp hair. "This isn't just about us making some noble stand. People's jobs depend on us, trainees who haven't debuted yet, staff who have families. One scandal." "This isn't a scandal," Jungkook interrupted. "It becomes one the moment it threatens profit," Jimin replied, voice rising. "You think they'll frame it as bravery, they'll frame it as risk." The van slowed at a red light. Outside, a cluster of fans pressed against barricades, phones raised, faces pale in the rain. Even through the tinted windows, their silhouettes were unmistakable, hopeful, desperate, devoted. Jungkook watched them in silence. "They're still here," he said. "They're always here," Jimin replied. "That's what makes this so dangerous. They believe in something we helped create. What happens when that image cracks?" Jungkook turned to him fully. "Maybe they'll see that we're human. Or maybe they'll feel betrayed," Jimin countered. "People don't just love us, they project onto us. We are their escape, their comfort, their idea of perfection. The moment we stop fitting that idea, they'll have to love us for who we are," Jungkook said, voice firm. Jimin laughed bitterly. "That's not how parasocial love works." The driver cleared his throat softly, eyes fixed on the road. The partition between front and back seats hummed upward, granting them privacy. The city outside blurred into streaks of neon and rain. Jungkook leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why are you so determined to believe the worst?" "Because I've seen it," Jimin said. "I've watched careers end over rumors. I've watched people disappear because they stopped being marketable. I've watched fans turn from devotion to fury because reality didn't match the fantasy." Jungkook's voice softened. "And you think we're that fragile?" "I think the system is," Jimin replied. Silence settled again, heavy with truths neither of them could dismiss. Jungkook spoke first this time. "When you cried on stage," he said, "I didn't think about headlines, I thought about losing you." Jimin's breath hitched. "I thought about the nights you stayed up making sure I ate," Jungkook continued. "About the way you pretended to be strong so the rest of us wouldn't panic. I thought about how tired you looked this morning and how you still told everyone you were fine." Jimin looked away, throat tight. "And I realized," Jungkook said, "that if protecting an image means watching you disappear piece by piece, then that image isn't worth protecting." The words landed with quiet finality. The van turned sharply, tires splashing through a shallow puddle. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and ominous. "You make it sound simple," Jimin whispered. It's not simple, Jungkook replied. It's terrifying, but so is pretending we're invincible. Jimin closed his eyes. Behind his lids flashed years of performances, interviews, rehearsals, the relentless demand to be flawless. He had built his identity on endurance, on meeting expectations no matter the cost. To step outside that role felt like stepping off a cliff. What if they make you choose, he asked, between me and everything else? Jungkook didn't hesitate. I already chose when I reached for you on that stage. Jimin's eyes snapped open. You can't say that. I just did. Jungkook. I'm serious, he said, voice unwavering. You're not a liability, you're not a weakness. You're the reason I learned how to stand here in the first place. If the world demands I pretend you don't matter, then the world can wait. Emotions surged, hot and overwhelming. Jimin's defenses flared in response. Don't romanticize this, he snapped. This isn't some dramatic declaration. This is contracts, lawsuits, backlash. This is people dissecting every glance, every word, until there's nothing left that belongs to us. Jungkook leaned closer, eyes fierce. Then we fight for what does. The intensity in his voice stole the breath from Jimin's lungs. You think I'm not scared? Jungkook continued. I am. I'm terrified that tomorrow everything could change, that doors could close, that the world we built could fracture. But I'm more terrified of looking back 10 years from now and realizing we let fear decide who we were allowed to be. The van fell silent, except for the steady rhythm of rain against glass. Jimin's voice, when it came, was fragile. I don't know who I am without the expectations. Jungkook's expression softened. You're the person who laughs too loud at his own jokes, the one who pretends he doesn't like sweet things but always steals dessert, the one who checks on everyone else before himself. You're not a role, you're you. Jimin's vision blurred again. He let out a shaky breath. You make it sound like that's enough. It is for me, Jungkook said. The words hung in the dim air, intimate and unguarded. The van slowed, pulling into the underground parking of their hotel. The world above remained a storm of speculation, but down here the air was cool and still, smelling faintly of concrete and engine oil. The driver shifted into park. We've arrived. Neither of them moved. Once we step out, Jimin said quietly, there's no pause button. Phones, cameras, statements, meetings, they'll want damage control. They'll want us to retract. Jungkook nodded. And what do you want? Jimin stared at his hands, at the faint tremor he could no longer deny. For years, he had chosen the path that preserved stability, that protected everyone else at the cost of his own truth. Tonight, that path felt heavier than ever. He stopped, the words catching. I want to stop pretending I'm not exhausted. Jungkook reached across the small space, his hand hovering before resting lightly over Jimin's. Then don't. The contact was steady, grounding. Above them, thunder rolled again, distant but unmistakable. Jimin inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle into something solid. Fear remained, sharp and real, but beneath it was a fragile, stubborn resolve. Okay, he whispered. They stepped out of the van together. The parking garage lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows that merged and separated as they walked. Somewhere beyond the concrete walls, the world was already rewriting their story. But here, in the echoing quiet between footsteps, they were no longer running from the truth they had uncovered. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain in a way that was not entirely terrifying. And for the first time that night, Jimin did not try to hide the fact that he was still holding on. The underground garage doors groaned shut behind them, sealing out the rain and the distant roar of the crowd, but the silence that followed felt heavier, charged with everything Jimin and Jungkook had set in motion. Their footsteps echoed against concrete as they moved toward the private elevator leading to the hotel's restricted floors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting stark shadows that stretched and fractured across the ground, merging and separating with each step they took. Halfway to the elevator, a voice cut through the stillness. You two need to come with me, now. They turned to see the senior director of their agency standing beside a black sedan, face pale, jaw tight. He wasn't supposed to be here. He rarely appeared in person unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. Jimin's stomach dropped. We just got out of a press statement, he said carefully. Can this wait until morning? No, the director replied. It can't. Jungkook stepped slightly forward, instinctively placing himself half a step in front of Jimin. What's this about? The director held up a tablet. Even from a distance, the screen's glow revealed a cascade of headlines, comments, live view counters spinning upward like a slot machine that refused to stop. Global fans divided over when stage moment. Idols refuse to deny relationship rumors. Sponsors demand clarity amid controversy. Jimin felt the blood drain from his face. The board is in emergency session, the director said. Investors are calling. Major sponsors are threatening to suspend contracts until we issue a definitive statement. Jungkook's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. We already gave a statement. You gave ambiguity, the director snapped. Ambiguity is fuel. We need denial. The word denial echoed like a gunshot. Jimin closed his eyes briefly. He had known this was coming. The system always corrected deviations. The machine demanded alignment. What happens if we refuse? Jungkook asked. The director didn't hesitate. Activities suspended, endorsements frozen, potential legal action for breach of contractual morality clauses. The concrete floor seemed to tilt beneath Jimin's feet. This isn't just about you, the director continued. There are hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depend on stability. You don't get to gamble with that. Jungkook's hands curled into fists at his sides, and we don't get to exist as human beings. You exist as representatives of a brand, the director said coldly. That's the reality you signed up for. Silence crashed down. Jimin could feel Jungkook's anger radiating beside him, hot and volatile, but his own fear was colder, sharper. He had spent years protecting the group, the staff, the delicate web that held their world together. The director's words struck at his deepest fear, that his truth could harm the people he loved. Give us a moment, Jimin said, his voice barely above a whisper. The director hesitated, then nodded once. 5 minutes, that's all you have. He retreated toward the sedan, leaving them alone in the humming garage. Jungkook turned immediately. We can't give them that. Jimin's chest tightened. If we don't, they'll punish everyone. They're manipulating you, Jungkook said. They're using guilt to force compliance. And it's working, Jimin replied, voice breaking. Because it's not a lie, people will get hurt. Jungkook stepped closer. People are already hurting, you are. That's different, Jimin insisted. I chose this. Did you choose to erase yourself? Jungkook demanded. The questions struck like lightning. Jimin turned away, packing once, twice, his reflections sliding across the polished car doors. You think I don't want to be honest? I do, but honesty has consequences we can't control. Jungkook's voice softened, but the intensity remained. We can't control the consequences of silence either. You think denying this will make everything go back to normal? It won't. It'll just teach them that our truth is negotiable. Jimin pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to contain the storm building inside him. I don't know how to choose between protecting everyone and protecting myself. Jungkook's reply came without hesitation. You shouldn't have to. But I do, Jimin said. That's the reality. The rain above intensified, drumming faintly against the ceiling like distant applause or warning. He couldn't tell which. What do you want, Jimin? Jungkook asked, his voice raw. Not what they want, not what the board wants, you. Jimin's hands trembled at his sides. No one had asked him that in years, not without an agenda, not without an expectation attached. I want to stop feeling like a liability, he whispered. I want to stop measuring my worth by how well I disappear. Jungkook closed the distance between them. then don't disappear. The simplicity of it hurt. You make it sound like I have a choice, Jimin said. You do, Jungkook replied. It's a terrible choice. It's unfair, but it's still yours. The director's silhouette shifted near the sedan. Time was almost gone. If we deny it, Jimin said slowly, we keep the machine running, we protect everyone, we go back to pretending. And if we don't, Jungkook said, we risk everything, but we keep what's real. Jimin looked at him, really looked, at the determination in his eyes, the fear he refused to hide, the unwavering presence that had steadied him on stage, in the elevator, in every moment he had almost collapsed. You're asking me to be brave, Jimin said. I'm asking you to be honest, Jungkook replied. Bravery is just a side effect. A bitter laugh escaped Jimin. You always did have terrible timing for life-altering decisions. Jungkook's lips twitched. You're the one who cried on stage. They stood there, suspended between two futures. Jimin thought of the trainees practicing late into the night, of staff members who bowed politely in hallways, of fans who found comfort in songs that had carried them through their darkest hours. He thought of the version of himself he had constructed, flawless, tireless, safe, and the quiet, suffocating grief of living inside it. He thought of Jungkook's hand, catching his tear before it fell. I won't lie, Jimin said at last, voice shaking but clear, but I won't label us either. What we have doesn't belong to their categories. Relief flickered across Jungkook's face, sharp and luminous. Then we stand by that. The director approached, expression grim. Time up, have you reconsidered? Jimin inhaled slowly. We will not issue a denial. The director's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Jungkook said, but it's ours. The director studied them, searching for hesitation. He found none. Then be prepared for the consequences, he said quietly. He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps fading into the cavernous garage. For a moment, the world felt eerily still. Jimin's knees threatened to buckle, the adrenaline draining from his system all at once. Jungkook reached out instinctively, steadying him with a hand at his elbow. Hey, he murmured, breathe. Jimin laughed weakly. You realize we just told $1 billion industry, no. Jungkook's grip tightened slightly, grounding. We told them we're human. The weight of what they had done pressed in, immense and irreversible. Fear coiled in Jimin's stomach, but beneath it was something steadier, a fragile, stubborn sense of self he had almost forgotten. Above them, thunder rolled again, closer now. What happens tomorrow? Jimin asked. Jungkook met his gaze. Tomorrow, we wake up and keep going. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't a guarantee, but it was real. They turned toward the elevator once more, stepping into the uncertain future they had chosen, not as symbols polished into perfection, but as two people refusing to vanish inside a narrative that demanded their silence. And as the elevator doors slid shut, Jimin realized that for the first time in years, the fear in his chest was matched by something equally powerful. The quiet, the elevator doors opened onto a private floor bathed in sterile white light, the kind that erased shadows but exposed every fracture, and Jimin hesitated at the threshold, as if the hallway itself might demand another piece of him before allowing passage. Jungkook stepped out first. The corridor was too quiet, no staff, no security, no polite bows, just the faint hum of climate control and the distant rumble of thunder bleeding through the building's bones. That's not normal, Jungkook muttered. Jimin's pulse quickened. They're isolating us. Before Jungkook could respond, a door at the far end of the hall opened. Not a manager this time, not a director. The rest of the members stood there. 7 pairs of eyes, each carrying a different storm. No one spoke at first. Jimin's throat tightened. This was the confrontation he had feared more than headlines, more than sponsors, more than the board. Not the world's judgment, but theirs. One of them stepped forward, expression unreadable. We saw everything. Jimin's chest constricted. Don't, another said, voice rough. Don't apologize before we even talk. The air thickened, heavy with years of shared history and unspoken fears. Jungkook moved closer to Jimin, not shielding him, but refusing to stand apart. If this is about the statement, he said, we made that choice together. A sharp exhale, that's exactly the problem. Jimin forced himself to meet their eyes. Say it. A long silence, then, quietly, do you understand what this could do to all of us? There it was, not accusation, not anger, fear. Jimin nodded slowly, yes. Then why, another voice demanded, the restraint cracking. Why risk everything we built? We fought for years to stand on that stage together. Do you think the industry will hesitate to tear us apart if they sense instability? Jungkook's jaw tightened. We're not unstable. You think they care about reality, came the reply. They care about perception, and right now perception is chaos. Jimin stepped forward, heart hammering. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I wanted this to explode? I cried because I couldn't hold it in anymore. He reached for me because he refused to let me fall. That's the truth. I won't turn it into a lie just to make it comfortable. The words echoed in the sterile hallway. One member looked away, jaw clenched. Another rubbed his temples. The tension wasn't just professional, it was personal, tangled with loyalty, exhaustion, and the terror of losing something they had sacrificed their youth to build. A voice broke the silence, softer this time. We're not angry because you were honest. We are scared because honesty has a cost none of us were prepared to pay tonight. Jungkook's expression softened. We are scared too. The admission shifted something in the room. You should have told us, someone said quietly, not the world, us. Jimin's breath caught. Told you what? That I'm drowning, that I'm terrified of becoming the weak link, that every time I look at you, I wonder how long before I'm the reason everything collapses. The rawness of his voice stunned them into silence. You think you're a burden, another whispered. Some days, Jimin admitted, yes. The confession hung in the air like shattered glass. Jungkook stepped in, voice fierce. He's not a burden. He's the reason half of us are still standing. The nights he stayed up making sure we didn't give up. The rehearsals he pushed through injuries so no one else would have to cover for him. You call that weakness? No one answered. The thunder outside cracked sharply, the sound reverberating through the building like a fracture spreading. One member sank into a chair against the wall, staring at the floor. This industry doesn't forgive deviation, he said. They'll test us, divide us, offer deals that isolate us. They'll make us choose between unity and survival. Jungkook's voice was steady. Then we choose unity. A bitter laugh. It's not that simple. It never was, Jimin said. Silence settled again, but it felt different now, less like a standoff, more like a shared reckoning. Did you mean it? Someone asked Jungkook suddenly. What you said, about not regretting reaching for him. Jungkook didn't hesitate. Yes. And if they demand distance, another pressed. Separate schedules, no joint appearances, no public interaction. Jungkook's eyes darkened. Then they're asking us to lie with our actions. All eyes turned to Jimin. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear his own voice. I won't pretend he's a stranger, he said. I've lost too much already to start erasing the people who kept me alive. The words landed with quiet finality. A long exhale moved through the group, like tension releasing in slow increments. We are not your enemies, one of them said softly. We're just terrified of losing this. Jimin's vision blurred. So am I. Another stepped forward, placing a hand on Jimin's shoulder. Then don't carry it alone next time. The contact was brief but grounding. Thunder rolled again, softer now, like a storm beginning to move on. A phone buzzed sharply in the silence. Everyone flinched. One member checked the screen, face paling. They've scheduled an emergency shareholder briefing at dawn. Jungkook let out a slow breath. Of course they have. They're going to pressure us to issue individual statements, he continued. Divide and contain the damage. The words sent a fresh wave of tension through the room. Jimin's voice was quiet but resolute. Then we refuse to be divided. Jungkook nodded, together. The others exchanged glances, fear, loyalty, exhaustion warring in their expressions. Years of shared struggle flickered between them. Cramped dorms, unpaid gigs, injuries hidden behind smiles, victories earned through relentless sacrifice. Finally, one of them spoke. If we stand together, we all face the consequences. Jungkook's reply was immediate. If we don't, we face them alone. Silence followed, thick with the weight of the choice. Then, one by one, they stepped closer. Not a dramatic gesture, not a declaration, just proximity, a refusal to scatter. Jimin felt something inside his chest loosen, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years. We'll face dawn together, someone murmured. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside the sterile hallway, under unforgiving lights and the shadow of an industry poised to retaliate, 7 figures stood not as products or headlines, but as people bound by something messier and stronger than fear. For the first time since the storm began, Jimin allowed himself to believe they might survive it, not unscarred, not unchanged, but still whole where it mattered most. Yielding relief of no longer pretending he was alone. The arena lights dimmed to a soft constellation of violet, and for the first time that night, the roar of thousands dissolved into a fragile hush, as if the entire world were holding its breath with them. Jimin stood at the edge of the stage, fingers curled around the microphone he no longer had the strength to lift. The confession still trembled in the air, his voice, raw and unguarded, had stripped away years of practiced smiles and perfect choreography. He had spoken of the loneliness behind applause, the suffocating fear of being loved only as an image, and the silent battles he had fought while standing beneath blinding spotlights. He had expected the silence to turn cold, expected whispers, judgment, disappointment. Instead, he heard someone sob. Then another. A wave of sound rose, not the thunderous cheers of a performance, but something more human, more fragile. The audience was crying with him. Jungkook stepped closer, his presence warm and steady at Jimin's side. The younger man's hand hovered for a moment before finding Jimin's shoulder, fingers gripping as if anchoring both of them to the same reality. His voice, when he spoke, was low and unsteady, yet carried through the arena. You're not alone anymore, not here, not ever. Jimin turned to him, eyes glistening under the stage lights. I was afraid, he admitted, barely above a whisper, afraid that if they saw the real me, they'd turn away. Jungkook shook his head, his own eyes shining. They stayed, I stayed, because the real you is the reason we're all here. The giant screens behind them replayed the fan cam moment, the trembling hands, the tear wiped away, the gaze that had frozen millions of viewers across the world. But now it was different. No longer a shocking fragment captured in secret, it had become a symbol, reclaimed by the 2 men standing beneath the lights. Jimin laughed softly through his tears. Do you know how terrifying it is to be seen like that? Jungkook's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Yeah, but it's also the only way to be loved for real. For a moment, they simply stood together, the weight of years settling into something quieter, something survivable. The music began again, just a piano at first, hesitant notes echoing through the arena like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. Jimin lifted the microphone, hands still trembling, but this time he did not hide it. His voice broke on the first line. No one looked away. Jungkook joined him on the second verse, their harmonies imperfect, human, and achingly sincere. The crowd did not scream, they sang with them, thousands of voices weaving a net strong enough to hold every fracture, every fear. Backstage later, the corridors buzzed with staff and distant echoes of celebration, but the dressing room was quiet. Jimin sat on the couch, exhaustion finally settling into his bones. Jungkook leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching him with a softness he no longer tried to conceal. You changed everything tonight, Jungkook said. Jimin shook his head. We did. A long silence followed, not uncomfortable but full, like the pause between heartbeats. Jimin traced the rim of a water bottle with his thumb, gathering courage for words he had swallowed for years. I don't want to hide anymore, he said. Not from them, not from you, not from myself. Jungkook pushed away from the wall and crossed the room in 2 quiet steps. Then don't. Their foreheads touched, a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of countless unspoken nights, shared fears, and fragile hopes. There was no camera now, no roaring crowd, no expectations, only the steady rhythm of 2 people choosing honesty over safety. Outside, the world would continue to speculate, to analyze every glance and gesture, to turn moments into headlines and symbols. But inside that room, none of it mattered. What mattered was the quiet understanding that had finally found its voice. When they returned to the stage for the final bow, the arena erupted, not in frenzy, but in a unified, radiant warmth. Lightsticks shimmered like a galaxy brought to Earth, each glow a promise. We see you, we hear you, we stay. Jimin looked out over the sea of lights and felt something he had not felt in years, peace. Not the fragile calm of denial, but the steady, grounded certainty that he did not have to be perfect to be worthy of love. Jungkook slipped his hand into Jimin's, a fleeting, natural motion, and this time they did not let go when the cameras caught it. Somewhere in the crowd, a fan lifted a phone, recording what would become another viral clip. But the power of the moment did not lie in its shock value anymore. It lay in its truth. 2 artists, 2 souls, no masks. And as the final lights faded and the curtain fell, the world did not feel like it was ending. It felt, at last, like it was beginning.